With all the transfers coming into Ole Miss football, it's natural that we kind of gravitate that way. But what about the players that are on the roster already, and what are we going to do about the slot position? We'll talk about that. We have the Texas A&M game preview as well. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do us a favor, subscribe there. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, or more importantly, Ole Miss every day. Am I right? I'm right. Anyway, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Good morning, and thank you for joining me today. Now, all the attention in this offseason is directed towards transfer-type players, and that's just natural. That's the way human nature is. It's always about what's new, what's next. You're going to be looking towards that. And you have stuff like PFF putting out lists of top 10 players that Ole Miss players are consistently on that list. So if I've been telling you that this offense has a chance to be explosive, these lists absolutely back it up. And the latest one that came up was this one that named Zakarhi Franklin as one of the top 10 wide receivers for the 2024 NFL Draft. There's players all over the place that are going to be showing out and putting themselves in the shop window for a chance to go pro. You have Zakarhi Franklin, you have Trey Harris, you have Caden Priestcorn. But what about the players that are coming back to Ole Miss football? What about the positions that we're counting on, and how can we do that differently than we did last year? The three players that I'm going to want to talk today, we're going to start with Jordan Watkins. And Jordan Watkins, a really good football player. He was an outside receiver that was converted to a slot mainly because of size and also because of necessity. You can see how he did in his zones last season. Really, really good inside of 10 yards. Struggled at 10 to 20. And in that middle tic-tac-toe board that we struggled in last year in the middle of the field, he struggled as well. Now, he would have really probably struggled, but there was about a 70-yard touchdown catch in the bottom middle zone right below the yellow line that he scored against Vanderbilt. So that kind of throws it off as well. He could be like 9 for 11 for 60 yards. So that would change the way that Jordan Watkins looked as a slot receiver. Like I said, he played that receiver as a necessity. He was an outside receiver at Louisville, and he did an admirable job. And I think he's going to take a step in year 2 as well. But there's other options for Ole Miss this year that they did not have last year, and there's little different idiosyncrasies that they could put in the offense. And another one is Dayton Wade. I love Dayton Wade. He was on a podcast a couple weeks ago. You can see under 10 yards, a little bit of a machine. That's expected for most of these guys. Struggled in that tic-tac-toe zone that we talked about. Did better with deep passes. He's more of an outside receiver than an inside receiver, but he does have the positional flexibility to move around. He's another person that might be a fit as a backup at slot receiver. Now, remember, when dealing with an Ole Miss offense, okay, when dealing with all the stuff that Lane Kiffin and this Charlie Weis Jr. / Jeff Lebby is the same offense that they ran when Jeff was here. This offense doesn't substitute much. So if Zakarhi Franklin and Trey Harris are the primaries on the outside, they're going to be mostly the primaries on the outside. Now, we've heard other players that have tried inside. Like I've heard that Braylon Brown is playing a little bit on the inside slot receiver, and he's doing pretty well. But as a person not in the chicken counting business, I look at Jordan Watkins having a role there and was on the field last year. I look at Dayton Wade having a role there and was on the field last year as well. And by the end of the year, he was one of the Ole Miss better receivers. So I do think one of those two receivers will be the primary slot receiver. Now, there's one thing that I think everybody needs to pay attention to, and that is 12 personnel. And that's one back, two tight ends. So the one back would obviously be Quinshon, but the two tight ends would be Caden Prieskorn and Michael Trigg. Now, I would argue bringing that in and starting to use that would help out the run game because you're adding another plus blocker on the field that's designed to block an outside linebacker or a free safety. Where it would be Jordan Watkins or Dayton Wade, it would be now be Michael Trigg. That would fit. The other thing is, with that hole in the middle of the field that we like to talk about, these are the Michael Trigg zones before he got injured against Vanderbilt. He only had about a half of a season last year. The second half of the season, he probably wants to forget a little bit. But the first part of the season, when, let's say he didn't adapt exactly well, but he was still very good receiving the ball. Now, when I take that, I think about moving him out to that slot receiver because receiving the ball has never really been a problem for this player. All of the idiosyncrasies of an attached or an unattached tight end, the blocking, the RPO game, things like that, there's a lot that goes into playing inside the box in this offense. It's designed to be, honestly, multifaceted. And he struggled a little bit picking that up, whether it was just hard, maybe he's not a willing blocker, but he is a very, very good wide receiver and a freakish wide receiver. I think you could put him on the outside in 12 personnel, use him in the run game because Quinshon's still going to be a thing, and adding another plus blocker to the scheme will help him out greatly and also will make the RPO game more effective if they don't know if you're coming to block or out for a pass route as well. So if you look at the contested catches, he's an excellent wide receiver. And I think with him and Caden Prieskorn on the field at the same time, this offense could become really, really more effective than it was even in 2020 when Elijah Moore and Kenny Yeboah was doing their thing. We've seen what an effective wide receiver tight end type combo looks like. Now, if you put Michael Trigg in that wide receiver place as an exceptional athlete, bar none, one of the best athletes on the team, put him next to Caden Prieskorn, who is a middle-of-the-field monster, those two will make linebackers. We told you all the time, every dayers can attest to this. I talk about how this offense is designed to torture linebackers. They can't be right. And this would be a situation to maximize that. You have the transfers on the outside in Zakarhi Franklin and Trey Harris. You still have Braylon Brown. You have Aiden Williams coming into camp. This wide receiver position has a chance to be really, really sneaky good as the season gets a little bit closer. And I'm pretty excited about what could be done at the slot position, but nobody's talking about it. And we need to pay attention to that. Honestly, from the first practice, we need to look who's lining up in those positions. We need to see if Michael Trigg is lined up outside as a wide receiver as opposed to an unattached tight end. Now, I understand Michael Trigg can do a little bit of tight end stuff, and I think Michael Trigg playing tight end and spelling Caden Prieskorn is kind of the ticket. But Michael Trigg playing wide receiver, that needs to happen just for mismatch purposes and to get him on much smaller safeties and linebackers, especially when we have teams on the schedule like Alabama, LSU, and Georgia that are going to have really good, really athletic defenses. You need somebody that can keep people occupied. Harold Perkins for LSU plays outside. If he is the only one that might have a chance to match up with a Michael Trigg type wide receiver / tight end, all of a sudden he becomes less effective in the pass rush game. That's all I'm saying. This is a matchup that if Ole Miss uses to its advantage, has a chance to take this offense to the very next level. And I think everybody knows that. I think everybody expects that Michael Trigg has next level, next tier athleticism. Brock Bowers level of athleticism. Mentally, he needs to get there, but Ole Miss also has to use him correctly to put him in the best possible situation to use his gifts. And Lane Kiffin's going to do that. Lane Kiffin is known for doing that. So I'm not worried about that at all. So let's pay attention to the slot position and see exactly what that can do. Anyway, today's show is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount and bonus bets back up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Can't really beat that. That's $200 you can spend on betting on everything from money lines to over-unders to who you think is going to hit the first home run. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. Now, I realize that Mississippi is a brick-and-mortar casino state. I get that. But if you go to Louisiana, to the road game at Tulane, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, Delta, Louisiana, across the river from Vicksburg. If you go up to Memphis, Tennessee, Jaxson, Tennessee, Nashville, all of those places that Ole Miss fans go quite a bit, you can use the FanDuel Sports app. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book for a reason. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $200 in bonus bets back. That's $200 back in bonus bets, win or lose. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, it's an official partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers. Sometime in the next 2 weeks, we are probably going to have Charles Stackhouse on the show. We're also working to get Jeffrey Rush on the show. He has agreed to do it. We need to set up a time for it to happen, but Jeffrey Rush will eventually come on the show as well. So lots of good stuff coming. This is supposed to be a dead time of the year. We're killing it, man. We're just killing it. Anyway, it is the middle of the summer, and Chris Beard is in the news again. We seem to be talking about men's basketball more and more than we used to do. And this time it's with non-conference scheduling. Now, he is all about taking Ole Miss basketball to play in unique places and do unique things and play against good teams and all of that stuff that Ole Miss fans are going to love Chris Beard for. Period. Now, the rumor that has come out is they're working on a game on December 16th in San Antonio, Texas, against the California Golden Bears. Now, last year Ole Miss played the Stanford Cardinals, so that's 2 for the Bay Area. Also, it'll be a doubleheader game that they play. I guess that will be in the Spurs facility, maybe. That Tennessee will play NC State on December 16th in San Antonio as well. That is pretty good. When you look at the schedule that we know about right now, there's Sam Houston State. This is from TJ Oxley from the Rebel Walk. If you don't follow the Rebel Walk, you should follow the Rebel Walk. They do a fantastic job. I'm all about providing content to readers for free. So between them and the Grove Report, I'm all about helping them out as well. So Sam Houston State on November 17th. NC State on November 28th. Memphis on 12-2 at home. Troy on 12-19 at home. Bryant on 12-31 at home. Now, if the Tadpad game happens, you would have to think it's somewhere between the Memphis game and the Troy game. Those would be two games that would be perfect for that, and Memphis honestly would make a ton of sense just because of a throwback game. But it should be fun. The NC State game is a part of the ACC SEC Challenge. Now, I love what Chris Beard's doing. I love the way the roster is coming together. There's so much to love about this men's basketball team, and this is going to have the most anticipation about a basketball season that Ole Miss fans have had since probably the late 90s or the early 2000s. When they were going to the NCAA tournament every year and going to the Sweet 16 and that, there was probably more anticipation then than at any point after that. Now, the year after Ole Miss went to the round of 32, the Marshall Henderson, Murphy Holloway, that crew of players, a lot of those graduated, so the anticipation wasn't exactly there. Although after Marshall Henderson, we got Steph Moody, And obviously, he did some pretty magical things for Ole Miss basketball as well. But it wasn't quite the same thing. Now, I'm looking forward to this. A game in San Antonio against a Pac-12 school. I like it. I like the idea that they're going to schedule somewhat difficult. They're obviously going to try and figure out ways to be in the best possible shape pre-SEC. Now, I expect this year to be a lighter scheduling year than, say, next year will be. Because I think Chris Beard realizes, hey, we need to bank some wins in the non-conference because it might be a little bit iffy in year one in the SEC for Ole Miss basketball. But his scheduling tier and the way he looks at how to schedule is going to be beneficial for Ole Miss basketball and as the program as a whole. Really like it. Really like it. All right, when we when we come back, Texas A&M's game preview. So that should be pretty good as well. So stick around. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers. We're working on Charles Stackhouse and Jeffrey Rush's interviews for the channel in the future. We'll continue to work towards media days as we work towards fall camp. The next month should be interesting. We are, 7 days away from Lane Kiffin taking the stage in Nashville. So we'll have all kinds of coverage. And I don't know how we're going to do media days, but we're going to do something. And there will be something very Lane Kiffin specific. You can expect several videos that day and perhaps all through the weekend based off of the Lane Kiffin and player appearances at SEC Media Day. Should be really good. Also have people that are going to be there that can get into these small gaggles of players. So the Locked On Ole Miss podcast is kind of going to be everywhere for SEC Media Days. That's pretty cool. We're growing like a weed. And we've been charting on the U.S. charts pretty much every day for the last month. And that is a really cool thing. And that is all because of you. I mentioned yesterday in the Locked On College Network, I'm in the top 10 in YouTube views, audio downloads, average percentage viewed. And if you look at the teams that are around there, much larger fan bases. So I do want to give you guys a ton of credit. Thank you very much for joining the show because we want to make this fun. We want to talk about Ole Miss sports and the other stuff, we don't necessarily care about. So Texas A&M coming to Oxford. And this is the thing you need to realize about the Texas A&M Aggies, okay? Texas A&M is completely in show-me mode. And what I mean by that is until they beat a Mississippi school, I'm not going to assume they are. It's kind of the opposite of the Ole Miss Alabama situation. I think Ole Miss on paper has an excellent chance to win that game at Alabama. But until Ole Miss beats Alabama, I'm going to have a hard time believing it's going to happen. And this game is going to be in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. Ole Miss is likely going to come in 6-2. And Texas A&M, their offense last year, even though Jimbo was kind of bashed on all during season, they averaged over 28 points a game. And now, because they were bashed on the offense, the Real Housewives of College Station has been brought to our attention with Bobby Petrino coming into College Station. And those two are going to fight for the reins of the offense over and over again. Strong personalities. Petrino has tried to push out a head coach before. We are going to watch this game. We're going to look what's happening. And if the schedule gets sideways, it has a chance to be absolutely delicious. But offensively, this is a team that potentially could be pretty good. We're going to talk about the 10 best players. I'm really high on Connor Weigman, and I am really high on those wide receivers. And then Reuben Owens, I think, is going to be a little bit of a dude. So A&M has a chance to be fairly explosive offensively. Now, defensively is a little bit of a different story. This says, the Aggies might have been number one in the nation against the pass, but that's because they couldn't stop anyone running the ball. Now, what we learned last year in Ole Miss, Arkansas, and Texas A&M all ran the same type defense. And what we found is it got found out. It was not structurally sound. people knew how to attack it and they were willing to run it. Now in the Big 12, all right, you're going to keep passing no matter what. Your identity trumps all over everything. So you kind of play into that defense's hands. But you look at like Alabama and Georgia and teams like that, the SEC kind of plays a different breed of football. And if you're willing to give them 5 yards of carry running the ball, they're willing to take it. And Vanderbilt kind of figured that defense out against Ole Miss. And everybody followed suit to where, I mean, you saw the return to murder ball from Alabama in the second half of that game. And you saw exactly how teams wanted to attack that. And I don't think people realize that if teams change that, and Ole Miss and Arkansas have changed their defense, not so sure about Texas A&M. DJ Durkin's still there, but he probably is going to run a little four-man stuff. So the defense, the talent is probably better than the defense allowed it to look last year. And that's all these teams. I think Arkansas and Ole Miss and Texas A&M has elite talent as well. But I do think structurally the defense allowed the offense to do other things that this year they might not be able to do against at least two of those teams. I don't know if DJ Durkin's changing. Now, the Texas A&M preview stopped the run. I mean, Quinshon Judkins, good grief, just an absolute beast against A&M last year. Everybody remembers that. Aggies averaged allowing over 2,500 rushing yards. No, it's absolutely nuts. To put this in perspective, the almost 900 yards more than the 2021 defense allowed. It's nearly 1,000 yards more. They were 2-5 when allowing over 4.5 yards a carry and 3-2 when they didn't. So whenever they stopped the run, they were a better team because they do have good talent on that team. Now, their biggest pickup was Josh DeBerry from Boston College. Denver Harris has gone to LSU. Lots of players off of this generational class that A&M signed last year has transferred away. So it's no longer that class. It's just a good class and not an elite class at this point. Now, their key player is McKinley Jaxson. That's a name you should probably remember. I think he's from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Big guy. He's going to be playing a lot of zero. He's an extremely athletic guy, can move around. Had 64 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 10 for loss. The entire defense has to do more, but I think tempo can neutralize heavy defensive line dominant teams, honestly. And I think that's the reason A&M is having trouble with teams like Ole Miss. Now, their key game is probably going to be the Arkansas Razorbacks in Arlington. By the way, I hate that this game is in Arlington. This game should be in College Station and Fayetteville every year. But I understand that Jerry wants to put another game in his stadium in Arlington. Texas A&M has owned this rivalry in the SEC. It lost to the Hogs in 2011 when it was still in the Big Ten, and then went on a run winning 9 in a row before losing in 2021. Got it back with a win in another wild game in 2022. Last year, the Aggies lost 6 straight after the Dayton Arlington, and this time around they have to deal with Alabama and a trip to Tennessee in the following 2 weeks. We're gonna dig where the Ole Miss game fits on A&M's schedule and why by that time it could completely have fallen apart for Texas A&M. That chance absolutely exists as well. Now, if you look at the 10 best players for the Texas A&M Aggies, Damani Richardson, a senior, Bryce Foster Jr., Josh DeBerry, the transfer that came in, a senior. If you know that, it's pretty much upperclassmen. You start with Walter Nolan at 5, Connor Wiegman at 8, Evan Stewart at 9, and Ruben Owens, the true freshman, at 10. The fact that underclassmen are higher on this list gives me a little bit of pause, but we'll see. A&M's a talented team, and there's no way you can get around that. If you look at the schedule, you see from the Arkansas game, the next week they have Alabama, the next week they have Tennessee. They get an off week, then they get South Carolina, then the next week Ole Miss, and then Mississippi State. By the time the Mississippi schools hit, A&M could be a complete dumpster fire. The Real Housewives of College Station could be in full effect. Arkansas is going to be a tough game for them. If they drop that game with Alabama waiting on their schedule, this thing has a chance to spiral out of control to the point where losing 3 out of 4 before Ole Miss is an absolute possibility. Now, South Carolina is not going to be a gimme either. You can't overlook that game. And like I said, until they beat Mississippi schools, Ole Miss and Mississippi State, I'm going to assume they can't. If you look at the ESPN FPI for that matchup, Ole Miss has a 60% chance of winning this game. If you look at the 8 games that Ole Miss has on their schedule, you can see that I have Ole Miss at, 7-2 after this game. Every game on this schedule, with the exception of Alabama and LSU, Ole Miss has at least a 60% chance of winning. Now, they have Georgia coming up next. That's a different story. That's a different animal. But ULM, Mississippi State, they're going to be favored in both of those games. So if you want to go chalk, it looks like 9-3. I will continue to do the game by game, but it genuinely looks like 9-3. Georgia has issues as well. They have some things they need to work through. ULM, I'm not necessarily worried about that game. At Mississippi State, 5 days after they play Southern Mississippi, that's going to be an unbelievably brutal game. Whoever designed Mississippi State's schedule should be absolutely fired. But you can see exactly how Ole Miss gets to 9-3. And if they get to 9-3, what is it, the Peach Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, whichever one is the Access Bowl that isn't the Sugar Bowl, I expect Ole Miss to be in. They've been in Access Bowls pretty regularly lately. This isn't necessarily a surprise to anyone. But we'll see exactly what happens as we give our game-by-game previews as well. Should be a lot of fun. Anyway, I hope everybody enjoyed the show today, and thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Everydayers, we got Charles Stackhouse scheduled for next week. We're going to set that up next week. And we've got an okay from Jeffrey Rush, but that one still needs to be scheduled. Technology, there's about 700 different things that could happen that would cause that interview to be delayed. But that is the plan before we move into media days. Once media days hit, we're going to have Lane Kiffin quotes. We are going to have different stuff. John Gillespie will be in Nashville in the gaggle, the backroom stuff. We're going to have him on the show to find out what's said there. Players that are going there, I think it's DeAndre Prince, Cedric Johnson, and Quinshon Judkins, all of which should be fairly interesting and will represent Ole Miss really well. I'm pretty fired up as we're getting close to this last week before SEC Media Days is over. I think one more show happens before the SEC Media Day weeks kick off. I've already got my credential in and all that good stuff. So we'll see exactly how that goes as well. Should be a lot of fun, but thank you very much for honestly making us everything that we are. And we're going to continue to have fun. We're going to continue to tweak and push the envelope and try and figure out ways to make this more fun and commentary and perspectives and all the stuff that I think makes us great. We're going to continue to do that as well. But thank you very much, and hotty toddy.